slides on this PowerPoint. There's only 39 total. All right. So today we're going to go over influences on the bureaucracy from a variety of sources. And then tomorrow we'll have a real short PowerPoint that we'll finish before we review for the test on Wednesday. All right, so we'll start with presidential influences. We know that the president influences bureaucracy because the president is responsible for the appointment of top-level bureaucrats. This means that Donald Trump was responsible for the appointment of Jeff Sessions and all sorts of other people. All right, obviously the example that we used when we were talking about the judiciary was the Department of Justice, and so it's an example that I'll continue to use. Aside from appointing top-level bureaucrats, the president also has the authority or the opportunity to fire a significant number of positions within the bureaucracy. I'm going to go ahead and tell you right now, the vast majority of presidents do not actually fire people. And I don't know why it works out this way. This is just sort of the way that it works out. They instead ask for somebody's resignation, and the majority of the time that resignation is granted and given. So like the district attorney in New York City who made a big stink of Trump firing him, that's actually fairly uncommon. So depending on how you want to argue it, I mean, look, if the President of the United States asks you to quit your job and then you quit, you got fired. All right? But technically, most of them will actually resign.
Isn't it because they don't want to work for a person affiliated with a party they don't agree with?
Well, I mean, that's why most of them will resign at that point. Like, if the President of the United States doesn't want you working there, and you were appointed by the previous president who is a member of an opposing party, therefore you're sort of ideologically aligned to challenge the president, why would you want to continue to work for somebody like that? Right? Especially in something like the Department of Justice. Because if your boss in the Department of Justice says, hey, you need to defend before the courts why this travel ban is legal, and you go, no, I don't think that it's legal, you should probably quit your job. Right? I mean, I'll be 100% honest with you. Dr. Black walked in here at one point and was like, hey, yeah, I think it'd be great if you never lectured again. I'd be like, okay, I won't be back next year then, because I love you guys, but I don't think you can teach yourself AP level classes just through, like, projects. I realize that's what education is supposed to be today, but come on, seriously? Especially when you have all sorts of like fake news and stuff that you get off the internet that you just automatically believe, right? The next thing you know, you're going to come to me and be like, iron triangles are what are played in the symphony. No, they're not. Right? But apparently I can't teach you what they are. You have to figure that out on your own. The president has the power to reorganize some of the bureaucracy, specifically as it sort of pertains to higher level stuff. Okay, so understand that he can reorganize some things, and he can propose the reorganization of pretty much anything that he wants. But again, that's just a proposal. Okay, so when I say that he can actually reorganize things, let's talk about one of the things that Trump actually did. Right. So Trump reorganized the national security briefings and who actually sat in on those briefings. And so one of the things that he did is he took the Wizard of Oz, Steve Bannon, and put him into a permanent position in the National Security Council. Are you laughing because I refer to him as the Wizard of Oz?
Yeah.
I think he's the one that's ultimately pulling the strings.
Did you see that SNL skit? Like it was like Oval Office cold open or whatever.
Yeah, where he was deaf. I'll be honest with you. I love SNL making fun of politicians. I love when SNL gets political. That one didn't make a whole lot of sense.
I just thought it was comical.
But it doesn't make sense. Like, when you make fun of like, speech patterns of presidents, right, like, that's comical. Because, obviously, everybody makes mistakes in terms of how they speak from time to time.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, some of the best were George W. Bush, God love him. Right? Every now and then, he just made comments that were absolutely hysterical. Right? Like the whole comment about terrorists are always looking for new and innovative ways to kill our people. And so are we. Really? Like, obviously he meant new and innovative ways to kill terrorists, but that's technically not what he said. And so that's kind of entertaining, right? But no, so Bannon is now has a permanent position in the national security briefings, right? And what's his qualification for that? He spent 6 years in the Navy. Right? By that account, I'm pretty much qualified to sit on that Security Council as well. Right? That's a little comical to me. But Trump has that authority if he wants to. Alright? He has the authority to propose budgets. He can appoint, one too far. Career officials without Senate consent, a significant number of them. Although, again, a lot of them are a lot of positions do require Senate consent. All right. And then some of the checks on his influence, obviously, Senate confirmation is needed for a lot of it. And the president really can't fire that many people, right? So if, let's say an independent IRS agent, well, I mean, Trump says that he's been audited every year for what, the last 20-some odd years? Right? Now that he's president of the United States, he can't all of a sudden decide he's going to fire every IRS agent who's ever audited him. Right? He doesn't have that sort of authority. Despite the fact that would be wildly problematic. I mean, he couldn't fire IRS agents just because he wanted to, right? Does not have that sort of authority. Most reorganization has to go through Congress as well as the budgets. So these are proposals that the president can make, but ultimately they don't necessarily require that the president has any influence in them, right? And then the last thing that's up here, those positions that the president is appointing. Those senior level executives, honestly, they don't change the bureaucracy a great deal. And do we understand why that is? I mean, is that a concept we can grasp? Maybe, maybe not. Why does any one individual not change the bureaucracy much? Think about this for a second. Can one teacher individually change the way education is run in the United States? Yes? No? Have a little conviction in your answer. The answer is no. Right? You might be able to change one little tiny corner of a campus, but you're not going to change things in general. Okay? Because education is too broad, there's too many forces, one person's not going to have that big of an impact. And in all honesty, it doesn't matter where that one person even is. Right? If you get a new superintendent appointed to, what's one of the largest school districts in the country, right? Maybe Houston, I think might be one of the largest.
Los Angeles.
I was going to guess Los Angeles, right? But even if you take somebody, or New York City, for instance, you take somebody that's running a school district like that, and sure, they might implement all sorts of wonderful programs and ideas, but how much can they really ensure that what they're asking of their teachers is even done? Right? It's wildly difficult to ensure that there would be any follow-through, even from the highest levels. And in reality, there's no point or purpose with the bureaucracy for any sort of innovation. The status quo is what prevails in bureaucracy, because that's the way it's always been, and you're not going to change it. So even at the higher levels, the people that the president appoints are not going to change it. Congressional powers, biggest one is the budget thing, right? The biggest power that Congress has over the bureaucracy is the fact that they control bureaucratic budgets. All right, and then the second, and probably almost equally as important, is this whole idea of oversight. Right, you have standing congressional oversight. which is a little bit different than investigations. Sajal, do you recall the difference between the two? Oversight and investigations? No? Lauren, do you have any idea what the difference is? No? Anyone? Yes, ma'am.
Oversight is like the routine when you're watching over the project.
And investigations
Is not all the time.
is not all the time. So oversight is continuous, right? Investigations are sort of incident specific. They happen at a time and then they'll stop, all right? Government Accountability Office, so this is a watchdog agency that ensures that money is being spent correctly. And hopefully you realize that this is sort of a necessity in life, because we obviously have issues with our bureaucracy and lots of sort of jokes about like the Pentagon spending $10 million on a toilet seat, right? Those are fairly frequent or common jokes. I saw a headline earlier today, didn't get to read the article yet, so I have no idea what it says, but I did see a headline earlier today that says that this Government Accountability Office has caught, or is in the process of reviewing $125 million that was misappropriated by the Pentagon. So again, how the Pentagon spent it, I'm not 100% certain. But that's an important part of Congress, right? They're ultimately responsible for the reorganization. We talked about this in terms of the DOJ, right? So who controls the number of district attorneys? Congress, right? Who controls the number of subsequent inferior courts? Congress, right? These are all congressional issues. Congress is controlling this, right? And then the Senate gets appointment confirmation for a variety of things, right? Other influences, there are sunset laws that allow Congress to ensure that actions are not behaving, are not going on forever and ever, right? Good example, did we talk, I know that it was mentioned in the paper that I gave you for your congressional legislation. Did we actually talk about sunset clauses at all? Not really? Okay, so my favorite legislation to talk about, or my least favorite legislation, depending on how you look at it, is obviously what's the one piece of legislation that I hate more than anything else? What? Patriot Act, right? And so the Patriot Act was passed in 2002, and the Patriot Act had a sunset clause, right? Which meant that it would stop at some point in time. And so when it was passed in 2002, senators like then Senator from Illinois, Barack Obama, talked about how it was a travesty and it was a violation of the Constitution. It was this horrible, horrible thing. And one of the few redeeming things of it is that it had this sunset clause on it so that we were only going to spy on you for 10 years, right? And then at the end of that 10-year period, we wouldn't spy on you anymore because at that point we wouldn't need to, or we would figure out some, more feasible way of actually catching terrorists, because reading Kyle's text messages is not going to help us catch terrorists. It's just not. Yet we do it anyways. And the one issue with, or the one problem with sunset clauses is that in 2012, when we had a whole different Congress and a whole different president, and now all of a sudden, then President Barack Obama was in charge and went, hey, that Patriot Act that I hated 10 years ago, now that I'm the one getting all this information, kind of a good idea. All right. There are also some limits on congressional influence, and some of this is sort of self-inflicted in terms of the limits. Congress doesn't really want to limit the bureaucracy a lot of the times. So one, congressional members can profit off of the existence of bureaucracy. And one of the best examples here is sort of military bases. If any of you have ever lived in a predominantly military town, the local economy thrives on the fact that there are service members that are stationed there. Okay, so when I was stationed in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, which is on the eastern coast of North Carolina, there's nothing around Camp Lejeune. Like, absolutely nothing. And so literally, if you walked off of base, like outside of the main gate, within 1 block, you could find 6 barber shops, 3 used car lots, and 2 pawn shops. And there were also a number of businesses that were, you know, predominantly aimed at let's say, just single 22-year-old guys. Okay. And these are businesses that are able to make money and be sustainable because essentially they're just sort of getting the bleed off of the overflow from the base there, right? You guys remember me telling you how much I made when I was in the Marine Corps, don't you? Right, I made $1.23 an hour.
Does that include is that 24 hours a day you got that?
Yes, I was a Marine 24 hours a day. I
So
was a
you
Marine
was
7
like-
days a week. Do the math though real quick. Like you got your phone's sitting on your desk. Do the math real quick. So take 123, multiply it by 24, because that's the number of hours a day. 1.23,
Oh, 2, 3.
right? And then multiply that by 24. And then multiply that by 30, because there's 30 days in a month.
885 months.
Yeah, and then multiply that times 52.
Right?
Under 1,000 a month.
What?
A little under 1,000 a month.
Little under $1,000 a month, yes. Which is not good money by any stretch of the imagination. Even once you take into account that I'm saying I'm getting paid even while I was sleeping,
But
I was still making less than $1,000 a month. Not good money.
But I mean, you don't have to pay for a lot of things.
Well, that's my point, right? So think about this then. That $1,000 a month that I'm making, right? How much of that goes to rent? None. How much of it goes to food?
None.
Well, some, because obviously you're going to eat out occasionally, right? But if you didn't want to, you didn't have to spend any of it on food, right? How much of it went toward healthcare, right? None. I mean, literally everything's 100% free healthcare-wise. You see a doctor, it's free. You get medication, it's free, right? There's not even like you'll figure out when you get a real adult job that you have what are called copays. Okay, and go ask your parents about it. Your parents know what copays are. All right, and even when you have health insurance and you need medication for something, you go and pay a small percentage of what the medication actually costs. Right. But yeah, so literally you're paying almost nothing out of pocket for anything, which means it's close to $1,000 that you could literally just spend on whatever you want. Right? In which case, you know, you could afford a $200 a month car payment for a used car. Right? You could afford, well, you had to pay for haircuts even on base. But they're like $5 on base. You're much better off getting a better haircut out in town for like $15.
Or you could just buy a razor.
No. Like. So I've cut my own hair ever since I got out of the Marine Corps because I'm just cheap, to be honest with you. My haircut would not cut it in the Marine Corps. Like it wouldn't. Like when you see it freshly cut, it does not meet military standards.
Why couldn't you just buy a razor and just get a buzz cut real quick?
Well, if you wanted to go absolutely bald, you could do that. Right? If you wanted to go absolutely bald, you could do that. But otherwise, no, because you have to fade it. And fading your own hair is really hard. Okay, so unless you wanted to take like an actual like big razor to your head and be 100% bald, you really need to pay somebody else to do it. But so the whole issue then there is and this is part of the Department of Defense, right? The military bases are part of the Department of Defense. So it's a part of the bureaucracy, right? And if you're a congressman from the Camp Lejeune, North Carolina area, do you want that base to close? No, because if that base closes, then all of those businesses that support the base personnel, right? All of those barber shops, all of those bars, right? Right, things like that, those all dry up and go out of business. And so that's not something that as a congressman you're really wanting to see happen. Additionally, Congress, we've talked about this on multiple occasions, Congress passes really broad legislation that gives the bureaucracy more power. That limits the influence of Congress. But again, just like this whole idea of, not wanting to stop the bureaucracy because you're profiting politically from it, we don't want to stop the Congress's choosing to limit its influence here by not passing strict regulations. Okay? Interest groups, we talked about a long time ago. We know that interest groups lobby. They're actually responsible for lobbying Congress, as well as lobbying the bureaucracy now. Alright? So that's one influence that interest groups have. This concept of the revolving door, we've talked about a couple of times. I want to make sure that you understand. With the revolving door, this is an influence that sort of interest groups have in terms of bureaucracy, because you take people from the private sector, move them into the public sector, and they're able to influence what's going on in the public sector while still having some sort of loyalty, maybe that's the wrong word, but there's still some sort of influence from the private sector that's impacting their decision making. You actually have seen a couple of examples of this that were a little out of control with the Trump White House, and I'll be honest with you, I think this is one of the few really legitimate sort of issues that you could take with the Trump White House. Trump's original choice for Secretary of the Navy, and I want to say maybe Secretary of the Army as well, both of them bowed out, and they both withdrew their own names because the revolving door was going to be a little bit too thin for them. They were not able to successfully cut ties with their private interests enough in order for them to feel as though they could do the job in government without undue influence. All right? So this is what you sort of see in terms of the Trump White House, because he is appointing so many, or has appointed a significant number of sort of career politicians to positions, which is, I think is a good thing, but you need that transparency to make sure that they're not still working on behalf of private industry or private interests. All right. Client groups will try to influence the bureaucracy. When we talk about client groups, what we're really talking about is sort of industries that join together almost in sort of an oligarchical fashion. You guys are probably too young to remember the Where's the Beef commercials. You remember those? You've seen them? Right? Are those commercials created by like one ranch or one slaughterhouse? No.
It's like a group.
It's all of them, right? Same thing, you've seen it in terms of like dairy ads, right? Like the Got Milk commercials, right? Do you remember those? Are you old enough to remember those? Okay. Like that would be from the dairy industry as a whole. That's a client group. And so the client groups try to influence bureaucracy because obviously the dairy producers as a whole need the agricultural department to behave in a manner that is sort of beneficial to them. All right. Iron triangles we've talked about in the past. We know that that's that sort of triangle between interest groups, congressional committees, and bureaucracies, right? So interest groups are actually trying to influence the congressional committee as well as the bureaucracy in that regard. And then issue networks or policy networks are really just sort of, in all honesty, sometimes these get referred to as iron triangles as well. I would sort of make the difference in saying that an iron triangle is guns, right? The issue network would be sort of more specific in terms of like the Mothers Against Gun Violence or whatever that new national organization is. Okay, then media influence. So first, first, media is sort of responsible for scrutinizing the behavior of various groups. So that's sort of one of their roles or their problems. Now, obviously, media gets a lot more complex in this day and age because of the influx of social media, which creates an influx of fake media or fake news. Don't listen to some of the things that you hear today. Most of what you see on television is actually real news. CNN is not fake news. Do they cherry pick what they cover? Yes. So does Fox. When we say fake news, that's primarily stuff that's done online because there's far more anonymity to that. All right. So like you never saw CNN or Fox or somebody like that covering the story about the Cosmic Pizza Parlor in DC that was running the child sex ring out of the basement for Hillary Clinton. You don't know what I'm talking about? Okay, like this was an actual fake news source story that went around until the point where some guy who read it actually went to the pizza parlor and because he was going to get to the bottom of it and expose everything, went in there armed, fired off a couple of shots while looking for the basement of this building, which didn't have a basement. And then ultimately he went to jail. All right, all because he's believing fake news. Additionally, the media is sort of responsible for the use of whistleblowers. This also can be kind of difficult to comprehend or understand sometimes. When you look at somebody like Edward Snowden, is Snowden a whistleblower? How many of you think Snowden is a whistleblower? How many of you think Snowden is a traitor? Okay. Some of you think both. I'm going to tell you right now, you really can't be both. Okay? You really can't be both. Whistleblowers are supposed to be protected. There's obviously a significant percentage of influential people in America that want to see Snowden brought back to the United States and sort of celebrated for being a whistleblower and letting people know that yes, the government is spying on you. There are others that want to see him brought back to the United States, tried as a traitor, and executed. So it's difficult to sort of deal with. The courts do influence bureaucracy some, so they can use injunctions which sort of dictate the actions of bureaucracy. And then they have writs of mandamus, which are really comical. That's basically just a statement from the court that says, do your job. No real, teeth behind that statement, right? Like, that's like me when I keep telling certain people in this class, get off your phone. What happens? Nothing. Because do I have any real authority? Not really. I mean, I can take your phone up, but at that point, I would take up 60% of your phones on a daily basis. Right? That's not worth it. Privatization or private business is influencing the bureaucracy in increasing amounts, specifically due to the privatization of certain things. And then in '93, we had the National Performance Review, which basically the purpose was to make bureaucracy more efficient. And so what it does is eliminates some subsidies, reduces some programs, cuts some jobs, gets rid of some red tape, and all that good stuff. There we go. That's all I wanted. All right. Yes, ma'am.